He sat alone every day, until one question changed his life forever. The park bench on the corner of Riverside Drive had become Thomas Mitchell's entire world. Every morning at exactly 9 a.m., the 73-year-old retired teacher would shuffle down the 3 blocks from his small apartment, carrying a thermos of coffee and yesterday's newspaper, and settle into the same spot he had claimed as his own for the past 2 years. The bench faced the elementary school across the street, and Thomas would sit there for hours, watching the children play during recess, their laughter a bittersweet reminder of the life he had once lived. Thomas had been alone since his wife, Margaret, passed away 3 years earlier. Their marriage of 48 years had been childless by choice when they were young, a decision that seemed wise when they were building their careers and traveling the world. But now, in the twilight of his life, Thomas found himself surrounded by a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. The other park regulars had learned to avoid him. Thomas's grief had hardened into a shell of bitterness that kept everyone at arm's length. When dog walkers tried to make small talk, he would grunt and turn away. When children's balls rolled near his bench, he would kick them back without looking up from his newspaper. The neighborhood had quietly labeled him as the grumpy old man, and most people crossed the street to avoid any interaction. But Thomas wasn't always grumpy. He had once been a beloved 3rd-grade teacher at Roosevelt Elementary, the very school he now watched from his bench. For 35 years, he had shaped young minds, dried tears, and celebrated small victories with hundreds of students. His classroom had been filled with laughter, learning, and the kind of magic that happens when a teacher truly cares about their students. That was before Margaret's diagnosis, before the long months of chemotherapy and hospital visits, before the funeral that felt like the end of his own life, before the retirement that had seemed like a blessing but had turned into a curse of endless empty days. Now, Thomas sat on his bench like a statue, watching life happen around him, but no longer feeling like he was part of it. He had convinced himself that this was how the story would end, alone, forgotten, waiting for death to reunite him with the only person who had ever truly understood him. What Thomas didn't know was that someone had been watching him too, and that a single question from an unexpected source was about to shatter the walls he had built around his heart and change the trajectory of his remaining years in ways he could never have imagined. 7-year-old Lucy Chun had been observing Thomas from the school playground for weeks. While her classmates ran and played during recess, Lucy often found herself drawn to the fence that separated the school from the park, watching the sad man who sat alone on the bench every day. There was something about his posture, shoulders slumped, head down, hands folded in his lap, that reminded her of how she felt when she was scared or lonely. That Lucy was a thoughtful child, the kind who noticed things that adults often missed. She had seen Thomas kick the soccer ball back to the older kids without smiling. She had watched him turn away when Mrs. Rodriguez, the crossing guard, tried to say hello. But Lucy had also noticed something else. Sometimes, when the children were laughing particularly loudly during recess, Thomas would look up from his newspaper and watch them with an expression that wasn't angry or annoyed, but deeply, profoundly sad. "Why is that man always alone?" Lucy asked her teacher, Miss Sarah, one afternoon as they lined up to go back inside after recess. Miss Sarah followed Lucy's gaze to Thomas's bench. "I don't know, sweetheart. Some people prefer to be by themselves." "But he looks sad," Lucy persisted. "Really, really sad. Like when my grandpa was sick and couldn't play with me anymore." Miss Sarah knelt down to Lucy's level. "You're very observant, Lucy. It's kind of you to notice when someone might be hurting. But sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings that are hard for children to understand." That night, Lucy couldn't stop thinking about the lonely man on the bench. She asked her mother about him during dinner, describing his daily routine, and her concern for his obvious sadness. "Maybe he's just shy," her mother suggested. Some people have trouble making friends. But Mama, Lucy said, everyone needs friends, even grown-ups, especially sad grown-ups. Lucy's mother, Dr. Jennifer Chun, was a pediatrician who had always encouraged her daughter's empathy and compassion. She was proud of Lucy's ability to see beyond surface appearances and recognize when someone was struggling. "You're right, Lucy," Dr. Chun said. "Everyone does need friends. What do you think we could do to help?" Lucy thought for a moment, her 7-year-old mind working through the problem with the kind of clarity that adults often lose. Maybe I could talk to him. Maybe I could ask him why he's so sad. Dr. Chun felt a mixture of pride and concern. She admired her daughter's compassionate heart, but she also worried about a young child approaching a stranger, even one who seemed harmless. "That's a very kind thought, sweetheart," she said carefully. "But we need to be careful about talking to people we don't know. How about we think of another way to help?" But Lucy had already made up her mind. The next day during recess, she would find a way to talk to the sad man on the bench. She didn't know what she would say, but she knew that someone needed to try to reach him, and if the grown-ups weren't going to do it, then maybe it was up to her. The next morning, Lucy arrived at school with a plan. She had convinced her best friend Emma to help her, and together they had devised what they considered a foolproof strategy to approach Thomas without getting in trouble with their teachers. Morning recess, while the other children played on the swings and slides, Lucy and Emma positioned themselves near the fence that bordered the park. Thomas was in his usual spot, newspaper spread across his lap, thermos of coffee beside him on the bench. "Are you sure about this?" Emma whispered, suddenly nervous about their plan. Lucy nodded with the determination that only a 7-year-old on a mission could possess. "He needs a friend, Emma, and sometimes you have to be brave to help people." Lucy took a deep breath and called out across the fence, "Excuse me, mister. Can I ask you something?" Thomas looked up from his newspaper, startled by the small voice. He saw a little girl with pigtails and a bright yellow dress standing by the school fence, looking at him with curious, unafraid eyes. "What?" He called back, his voice gruff from disuse. "Why do you sit alone every day?" Lucy asked, her voice carrying clearly across the small distance between them. "Don't you have any friends?" The question hit Thomas like a physical blow. In all the months he had been sitting on that bench, no one had asked him such a direct, honest question. Adults had tried to make polite conversation, but no one had simply asked him why he was alone. Thomas stared at the little girl, unsure how to respond. Part of him wanted to tell her to mind her own business, to go play with her friends and leave him alone. But there was something about her earnest expression, about the genuine concern in her voice, that stopped him. Double quotes, Thomas began, then stopped. How could he explain to a child that he was alone because everyone he had ever loved was gone? How could he tell her that he sat on this bench because it was the only place where he felt close to the life he used to have? "My name is Lucy," the girl continued when Thomas didn't answer. "What's your name?" "Thomas," he replied automatically, surprised by his own response. "Hi, Thomas," Lucy said with a smile that seemed to light up the entire playground. "I see you here every day, and you always look sad. Are you okay?" Thomas felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he had built around his heart to protect himself from further pain. This child's simple, direct compassion was more powerful than all the well-meaning attempts at conversation he had received from adults. Thomas started to say he was fine, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself saying, "I'm lonely, Lucy. I'm very lonely." The admission surprised him. He hadn't said those words out loud to anyone, hadn't even fully acknowledged the truth of them to himself. But somehow, this little girl's innocent question had unlocked something he had been keeping buried. Lucy's face softened with understanding that seemed far beyond her 7 years. "I get lonely sometimes, too," she said, "especially when my mom has to work late and I'm with the babysitter." "But you know what helps?" Thomas found himself leaning forward, genuinely curious about what this wise little girl might say. "Talking to people," Lucy continued, "even if they're strangers at first. My mom says that every friend was a stranger once." Thomas felt tears welling up in his eyes, the first tears he had shed since Margaret's funeral. "That's very wise, Lucy. Would you like to be friends?" Lucy asked with the straightforward honesty that only children possess. "I could talk to you during recess, and maybe you wouldn't be so lonely." Before Thomas could answer, the school bell rang, signaling the end of recess. Lucy waved goodbye and ran toward the school building with her friend Emma, leaving Thomas sitting on his bench with his world completely transformed. For the first time in 3 years, Thomas felt something other than grief and emptiness. He felt hope. This little girl had seen through his gruff exterior to the pain underneath, and instead of walking away, she had offered him the one thing he needed most, human connection. That afternoon, Thomas found himself looking forward to the next days. Recess in a way he hadn't looked forward to anything in years. He went home and, for the first time since Margaret's death, he called his sister in California. "Helen," he said when she answered, "it's Thomas. I know we haven't talked in a while, but I wanted to hear your voice." His sister was so surprised she almost dropped the phone. "Thomas, are you okay? You sound different." "I met someone today," Thomas said. "A little girl named Lucy. She asked me why I was alone, and I realized I don't want to be alone anymore." Helen began to cry. She had been worried about her brother for years, watching him withdraw from the world after Margaret's death. She had tried to reach out, but Thomas had pushed everyone away. "Tell me about her," Helen said through her tears. Thomas spent the next hour telling his sister about Lucy's simple question and how it had shattered the walls he had built around his heart. As he talked, he realized that Margaret wouldn't have wanted him to spend his remaining years in isolation and bitterness. She would have wanted him to find joy again, to connect with people, to use the love they had shared to make the world a little brighter. "I think I want to start living again, Helen," Thomas said. "I don't know how, but I think I'm ready to try." "I'm so proud of you," Helen replied. "And I think Margaret would be proud too." That night, Thomas slept better than he had in 3 years, and when he woke up the next morning, he felt something he had almost forgotten existed, anticipation for the day ahead. The next day, Thomas arrived at his bench earlier than usual, carrying not just his thermos of coffee, but also a small bag of cookies he had baked the night before, Margaret's recipe that he hadn't used since she died. When recess began, he found himself watching the fence eagerly, waiting for Lucy to appear. She didn't disappoint him. As soon as the children were released onto the playground, Lucy ran straight to the fence, her face lighting up when she saw Thomas waiting for her. "Hi, Thomas," she called out. "You look different today. You look ... happier." Thomas smiled, the first genuine smile he had worn in years. "I feel different, Lucy. Thank you for asking me that question yesterday. It made me realize some important things." "What kind of things?" Lucy asked, settling down on the grass near the fence so they could talk more comfortably. "Well," Thomas said, "I realized that I'd been so sad about losing someone I loved that I forgot how to love the people who are still here. I forgot how to be a friend." Lucy nodded sagely. "My grandma says that when people we love go to heaven, they want us to keep being happy and making new friends. She says they watch us and feel proud when we help other people." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Your grandma sounds very wise." "She is," Lucy agreed. "She also makes really good cookies. "Do you like cookies?" Thomas laughed, pulling out the bag he had brought. "As a matter of fact, I do. I brought some to share with you, if your teacher says it's okay." Lucy's eyes widened with delight. "You brought cookies for me? That's so nice." With Lucy's teacher's permission, Thomas shared his cookies with Lucy and several of her classmates who had gathered around the fence, curious about the man who had suddenly become friendly. For the first time in years, Thomas found himself surrounded by children's laughter and chatter, and instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt energized. "Mr. Thomas," said Emma, Lucy's best friend, "Lucy told me you used to be a teacher. Is that true?" "Yes," Thomas replied. "I taught third grade for 35 years. "Did you like it?" asked another child. "I loved it," Thomas said, and as he spoke, he realized how much he missed the classroom, missed the opportunity to shape young minds and make a difference in children's lives. Over the following weeks, Thomas's daily routine changed dramatically. Instead of sitting alone and withdrawn, he became the unofficial storyteller of the playground. Children would gather at the fence during recess to hear his tales of adventure and wonder, and Thomas found himself remembering why he had become a teacher in the first place, that Lucy had become his special friend, the one who had started it all with her simple, brave question. She would often bring him drawings she had made or share stories about her day, and Thomas would listen with the attention and care he had once given to his students. "You know what, Lucy?" Thomas said one afternoon as they sat talking through the fence. "You changed my life with that question you asked me. You reminded me that it's okay to be sad sometimes, but it's not okay to stop living." Lucy beamed with pride. "I'm glad I could help. That's what friends do. They help each other feel better." 6 months after Lucy's life-changing question, Thomas Mitchell was a completely different man. The transformation was so remarkable that people who had known him during his bitter, isolated period barely recognized him. He had volunteered to help with the school's reading program, using his decades of teaching experience to work with struggling students. He had reconnected with old friends and colleagues, rebuilding relationships that had withered during his years of grief. Most importantly, Thomas had found a new purpose. Inspired by Lucy's compassion and the joy he had rediscovered in working with children, he had started a program called Grandparents and Friends that paired elderly community members with local elementary students for mentoring and friendship. Idea came from watching how naturally Lucy reached out to me. Thomas explained to the local newspaper reporter who was writing a story about the program. Children have this incredible ability to see past our defenses and connect with our hearts. And older adults have so much wisdom and love to share if we just create the opportunities for those connections to happen. The program had been an immediate success, with dozens of seniors and children forming meaningful friendships that enriched both their lives. Thomas had become something of a local celebrity, known not as the grumpy old man on the bench, but as the community leader who was bringing generations together. Lucy, now 8 years old, remained Thomas's closest friend and biggest supporter. She had been the guest of honor at the program's launch event, proudly telling everyone how she had met Thomas and how their friendship had grown. "I just asked him why he was sad," Lucy told the reporter. "Sometimes that's all people need. Someone to notice them and care about how they're feeling." Dr. Jennifer Chun, Lucy's mother, had watched the friendship between her daughter and Thomas with amazement and gratitude. "Lucy taught me something important," she said. "She showed me that age doesn't matter when it comes to friendship, and that sometimes the most profound connections happen when we're brave enough to reach out to someone who seems different from us." Thomas had also reconnected with his sister Helen, who had flown out from California to see the remarkable changes in her brother's life. "It's like he came back from the dead," she told friends. That little girl didn't just ask him a question. She performed a miracle. On the first anniversary of their meeting, Thomas and Lucy had a special celebration. Thomas had arranged for Lucy's entire class to visit the community center where the Grandparents and Friends program met, and the children spent the afternoon playing games and sharing stories with their elderly mentors. "Lucy," Thomas said as they sat together watching the intergenerational friendships flourishing around them, "I want you to know that you saved my life. Not just by asking me that question, but by showing me that it's never too late to start over, to make new friends, to find new purpose." Lucy smiled, her eyes sparkling with the wisdom that had first drawn Thomas to her. "I didn't save your life, Mr. Thomas. I just helped you remember that you wanted to live it." Thomas looked around the room at the seniors and children laughing. Together, at the connections being formed, at the joy being shared, and he felt Margaret's presence more strongly than he had since her death. But this time, instead of feeling sad, he felt grateful. Grateful for the love they had shared, grateful for the time they had together, and grateful for the opportunity to honor her memory by spreading love and connection to others. "You know what the best part is, Lucy," Thomas said. "Now I'm not the only one who's not alone anymore. Look around. Dozens of people have found friendship and purpose because you had the courage to ask one simple question." Lucy looked around the room and nodded with satisfaction. That's what happens when people care about each other. It spreads like ripples in a pond. As the celebration continued around them, Thomas reflected on the profound truth that a child had taught him, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply notice someone who is hurting and ask them how they're feeling. Lucy's question had not only changed his life, it had created a ripple effect of connection and compassion that would continue to spread throughout their community for years to come. The bench where Thomas had once sat alone was now a gathering place for the Grandparents and Friends program, with a small plaque that read, "In honor of Lucy Chun, who reminded us that every friendship begins with a single question. Are you okay?"